In 1959, the Soviet Union gained power over Cuba when Fidel Castro seized Havana. Up until this point, Cuba had been a U.S.-backed government. In 1961, the U.S. cut diplomatic ties with Cuba and started planning to overthrow Castro. At the same time, the U.S. was up against the Soviet Union in the Cold War. The U.S. discovered that Cuba was assembling nuclear weapons sent in by the Soviet Union. This was alarming to the U.S. because Cuba is just 90 miles from Florida shorelines, and the missiles could greatly damage the U.S. The U.S. reacted by forming a blockade around Cuba and got ready for a war if that's what it came to. In April 1960, the U.S. assembled Troop 2506, which was made up of Cuban exiles. The U.S. believed that this group would be able to fight and overthrow Castro. There were, however, double agents working with Castro. The plan had 3 phases. Phase 1 was to destroy as many of Castro's combat planes as possible. Phase 2 was to destroy any remaining planes, and Phase 3 was to invade Cuba by sea and by air. After Phase 1, it was discovered that the U.S. was involved. Phase 2 was then cancelled. However, Phase 3 was continued. On April 16, 1961, the Bay of Pigs invasion, or Phase 3, was continued. The U.S. was outnumbered, and the Bay of Pigs invasion failed miserably, with 75% of troops ending up as Cuban prisoners. In October of 1962, the U.S. formed a blockade that prevented Cuban ships from coming closer to the U.S. As Cuban ships approached the line, there was an intense standoff. On October 26th, however, the Soviet Union said that they would get rid of the weapons if the U.S. didn't invade Cuba, and the next day, the Soviet Union requested the missiles that were pointed at Turkey to be disassembled. Kennedy publicly announced he wouldn't invade Cuba, and then secretly got rid of missiles facing Turkey. On July 20th, 2015, Cuba and the U.S. restored diplomatic relations. However, the U.S. continues its commercial, economic, and financial embargo. It is illegal for U.S. corporations to do business with Cuba. President Trump still supports the embargo, but Cuban government has called for it to be repealed. On December 17, 2014, President Barack Obama announced a process to begin normalizing relations with Cuba.
More than 54 years ago, at the height of the Cold War, the United States closed its embassy in Havana. Today, I can announce that the United States has agreed to formally reestablish diplomatic relations with the Republic of Cuba and reopen embassies in our respective countries. This is a historic step forward in our efforts to normalize relations with the Cuban government and people and begin a new chapter with our neighbors in the Americas. When the United States shuttered our embassy in 1961, I don't think anyone expected that it would be more than half a century before it reopened. After all, our nations are separated by only 90 miles, and there are deep bonds of family and friendship between our people. But there have been very real, profound differences between our governments, and sometimes we allow ourselves to be trapped by a certain way of
It
doing.
is currently unsure what Trump will do regarding Cuba.